The Complete and Sudden Attainment of Buddhahood by Chinul. Moguja was asked, "We have heard that in your teachings persons who are cultivating the mind nowadays should first transform the seed of their own ignorant discrimination, which they employ every day, into the unmoving wisdom of all the Buddhas. Afterward, their Sön cultivation, which is based on the nature, will then become sublime. Is this unmoving wisdom of the fruition of Buddhahood the noumenal Buddha of original enlightenment, or a newly produced phenomenal Buddha?" Commenting on the nature arising chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra, the patriarch, Jing Liang, Zhengguan, listed three alternatives to explain the meaning of the Buddha wisdom when it exists in the minds of sentient beings. First, all sentient beings are endowed with it. Second, each of them is endowed with the future fruition. Third, each individual is invested with the fruition immanent in all other beings. Which of these three alternatives is correct? If it is assumed that the unmoving fruition of Buddhahood involves nothing more than looking back on the original enlightenment of the nature's purity, then it must be the first alternative. But if Buddhahood means the unimpeded interpenetration of all phenomena, then the latter two alternatives, which involve attaining Buddhahood through perfect interfusion, are correct. The explanations given by the ordinary scholastic sects about the meaning of both the perfect interfusion approach and the progressive approach involve attainment of Buddhahood at the first abiding stage of the arousing of the bodhicitta. But does seeing the nature and attaining Buddhahood, as practiced by Sön adepts nowadays, also climb to the first abiding stage? The scholastic teachings say that the adept who is at the stage of faith must cultivate diligently for 10,000 kalpas before the 10 grades of faith are perfected. But men of the present age have certainly practiced for 10,000 kalpas and should have already climbed to the first abiding stage and attained Buddhahood. Yet they are so wide of the mark that they hardly deserve our sympathy. We ask you respectfully to discuss these points so that our doubts will be dispelled. Let us hear what we have not heard before." I smiled and said, "In my youth this mountain monk was cast into the patriarchal domain, and what I have trained in is completely different. How could I presume to discuss the correct and incorrect points and teachings about the attainment of Buddhahood in the Hwaom sect, which are debated so exhaustively by lecturers nowadays? It is only because in my spare moments from Sön practice I happened, by chance, to obtain a copy of the exposition of the new translation of the Avatamsaka Sutra and gain something of its flavor, that I will now try to discuss it with you. Forget the critical mind you developed in previous study of different doctrines and principles. Listen carefully to my words and reflect upon them. The exposition of the Avatamsaka Sutra is a composition of the elder Li Dongxuan, an incarnation of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva. The elder's spirit descended into Tang, China, where he lived secluded in a hermitage on Fangshan in Peicing. Dragon women offered delicacies to him, and a tiger acted as his attendant. At night he needed no lamps or candles, for he emitted a ray of light from between his teeth. In this wise he wrote and compiled the great exposition of the Avatamsaka Sutra in 40 fascicles. His style is simple, but the truths he offers are profound and surpass all ordinary standards. He was the kind of man who is rare indeed. Because of my karmic affinities from past kalpas, I was able to search through the Dragon King's scriptural repository, where it was my great fortune to come across this text. Relishing its flavor, I forgot all weariness and examined its principles exhaustively. Only those who ignore the words and understand the meaning, and then ignore the meaning and understand the mind, can have faith in it. If we carefully consider the intention of the commentator, it is clear that Li's primary concern was to analyze the Avatamsaka Sutra's main principles so that ordinary men of great aspiration in the degenerate age of the Dharma, while within this realm of birth and death, could have a sudden awakening to the fact that the unmoving wisdom of all the Buddhas is the source for the arousal of the bodhicitta at the time of the initial awakening. Consequently, the hall in the second assembly is named Wisdom of Universal Brightness. He explained the doctrine of the 10 faiths, and directly pointed out that faith is the great functioning of the Tathagata's wisdom of universal brightness, which is without direction or limitation at any level. Furthermore, he discussed the 10 colored worlds, the 10 wisdom Tathagatas, and the 10 chief bodhisattvas to denote aspects of the Dharma so that they would be easy to understand. First, he mentions the golden world of the East, so that those who would arouse the bodhicitta would have faith in the principle of their own pure and unstained Dharmakaya. That the Buddha who is served originally is the Buddha of unmoving wisdom prompts them toward direct faith in the fact that their own seed of ignorant discrimination is originally the unmoving wisdom of all the Buddhas. That the chief bodhisattva is Manjushri prompts them toward direct faith in the fact that their own fundamental wisdom contains the signless, sublime wisdom of skillful discernment. Any sentient being who hears this universal Dharma and then produces the bodhicitta is himself endowed with exactly this sort of Dharma. Therefore, in the Bright Enlightenment chapter it is said, the golden world is everywhere. The Buddha of unmoving wisdom is everywhere. Manjushri is everywhere. This is more fully explained in the commentary. Question. When you said just now that people who are cultivating the mind look back on the Buddha of unmoving wisdom, is this the noumenal Buddha of original enlightenment, or the Buddha of the fruition wisdom, which is already perfected? If you mean the fruition wisdom, then although one's own fruition of Buddhahood and the fruition of others are different, the problem must be considered in relation to both the doctrine of perfect interfusion, that the fruition of Buddhahood pervades everything, while conforming to the noumenon, as well as the doctrine of the interpenetration of the three time periods. But if you take the view of the progressive approach, how can Vairochana Buddha, the embodiment of the fruition wisdom which is already perfected, be haphazardly correlated with sentient beings at the bound stage who have not yet practiced? Chinul, if you obstinately cling to this sort of doubt and do not renounce it, how can you make use of the contemplation approach expounded by the commentator? You must forget your passions, remain empty and bright, and clear away all your worldly affairs. Only then will you be able to use it. If we examine the explanation delineated in the exposition, we find that it says the unmoving wisdom is also the fundamental wisdom of universal brightness. It is precisely this fundamental wisdom which is called the fruition wisdom of all the Buddhas. This fundamental wisdom is the essential nature of noumenon and phenomena, nature and characteristics, sentient beings and Buddhas, oneself and others, stained and pure, cause and effect. Consequently, it does not refer only to that noumenon which does not lose the purity of its nature during involvement in defiled activities. If we refer to it in relation to the master of the flower treasury world, this fundamental wisdom is called Vairochana Buddha. If we refer to it in relation to the master of the golden world, it is called the Buddha of unmoving wisdom. If we refer to it in relation to the place discovered by sentient beings of great aspiration when they look back on the radiance of their minds, it is called the wisdom of universal brightness Buddha, of one's own mind, the Buddha of unmoving wisdom of one's own mind, or Vairochana Buddha, of one's own mind. Accordingly, any name we give it includes the 3 bodies, the 10 bodies, and so on. This fundamental wisdom of universal brightness originally contains all dualistic dharmas, oneself and others, sentient beings and Buddhas, tainted and pure, cause and effect, noumenon and phenomena, nature and characteristics, sentience and insentience. Therefore, the exposition says, the approach to Dharma in this Buddhavatamsaka Sutra is the path for sentient beings of great faculties to have faith in the one true Dharma Dhatu, which is their own mind's wisdom of universal brightness. It should be known that it is this type of person who is able to receive this sutra and abide by its contemplation practice. Furthermore, it says, the Dharma Dhatu and the sphere of empty space are pervaded by the unabiding wisdom and the phantom regalia of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions. Their Dharma nature completely pervades the 10 directions. Like a reflection, they manifest material bodies which are the same as one's own body, for they are originally non-dual and undifferentiated in their essences. Accordingly, the wisdom bodies of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions are like shadows, and their words are like echoes. One who has this sort of faith and understanding will most certainly attain Buddhahood. Since our faith is also this sort of awareness and this sort of faith and understanding, how can we ever backslide? All of the body, all of the mind, and all of the sense spheres are entirely the noumenal wisdom of the Dharmakaya. They are originally unabiding and originally unascertainable. Verbal discriminations are like echoes in space. They are responses to non-productive conditions. These sounds are produced according to the objects present, but originally they are unabiding. If we understand this Dharma and give rise to faith and understanding, how can we ever backslide? Even though we may have habit energies which temporarily make our thoughts regress, we will never fall away from the faith and abiding stages. It also says, essentially, you should always have faith that your own physical, verbal, and mental states and all your different impulses arise from the Tathagata's physical, verbal, and mental states, and from all his different impulses. They are all without essence or nature, without self or person, since they all arise from the non-productive conditions of the own nature of the Dharmadhatu. You cannot find a place where their roots were originally planted. Their nature itself is the Dharmadhatu. There is no inside, outside, or in between. You should be aware of this and investigate according to these guidelines. Whether you observe yourself or others, the essential nature is identical. Hence there is no I or mine. Practice in this manner by using the power of samadhi and prajna. When you understand for yourself, contemplate the sufferings of sentient beings. Then your benefiting of yourself and others will be like Samantabhadra's vast practices and vows. It will be identical to this sutra's rule of the 5 stages. Furthermore, in the appearance of the Tathagata's chapter of this sutra, it is said, Bodhisattva Mahasattvas should know that every thought in their mind is invested with the right enlightenment achieved by the Buddhas. This statement shows clearly that Buddhas and Tathagatas do not achieve right enlightenment apart from this mind. It also says the minds of all sentient beings are also the same. They are all invested with the right enlightenment achieved by the Tathagatas. This makes it clear that the self-essence of the minds of both ordinary men and saints are pure and indistinguishable. Even though delusion and awakening exist, there is not a hair's breadth of difference between them. If only one single thought of falsity does not arise in the mind, then the mind and its mental states will be emptied and the nature itself will be unborn. When nothing is gained and nothing is realized, right enlightenment is achieved. If one then benefits sentient beings universally with this dharma, it is the practice of Samantabhadra. Accordingly, the sublime wisdom, which is devoid of mind, nature, and noumenon, and discerns the one vehicle, the 3 vehicles, and the causes and results of human and deva existence, is named Manjushri. Practicing together tirelessly, using discriminative wisdom to benefit sentient beings while being aware of their faculties, is named Samantabhadra. The vow to rescue all sentient beings through great compassion is named Avalokiteshvara. To cultivate these 3 types of mind simultaneously is named Vairochana Buddha. When these become a habit of mind, it is called self-reliance. When there are no dharmas which do not stand out clearly, it is called unimpeded. The wisdom which responds to the capacities of others pervades all the 10 directions. Its nature neither comes nor goes. This is called the supernatural powers. Even though one has only begun cultivation, it is completely habitual. Even though one masquerades at being born for many kalpas, his sun of wisdom is unchanging. This is not difficult at all, so why should you not attempt it? Even if you train, but obtain no result, the merit of such practice will still surpass that of men and gods. But if you neither believe nor cultivate, when will the suffering ever end? Finally, although this sutra is the gate to the fruition of Buddhahood, it is bestowed upon ordinary men who enjoy the training and are not repulsed by birth and death, so that, on this sea of birth and death, they may obtain all-embracing wisdom. If there are any followers of the 2 vehicles in the assembly, they will be deaf and will not listen. Although bodhisattvas of the 3rd vehicle have practiced the 6 paramitas and have obtained the 6 supernatural powers, they still have a mind which fears suffering. Hence they are repulsed by the dangers of the world and want to be born in the Pure Land. Even though they might have a mind of loving kindness and compassion, while abiding in this world to benefit sentient beings, when they hear this teaching, a residual substratum of craving prevents them from having faith in it. This fact is clarified in the sutras. This sutra, however, does not give the same explanation. It says that since all sentient beings are born from the fundamental wisdom of all the Buddhas, that fundamental wisdom of universal brightness becomes the starting point in the production of the bodhicitta. Having considered deeply and repeatedly the meaning of these quotations from the exposition, I have found that the doctrine of mutual interfusion of sentient beings in Buddhas, as presented by the commentator, is essentially intended to urge those who contemplate the mind in order to enter the path to have faith in the fact that their own body, speech, and mind, as well as the forms in the sense realms, all arise from the body, speech, mind, and sense realms of the Tathagatas. These phenomena are all devoid of essence or nature, for originally they are non-dual, and their essences are indistinguishable. Since they all arise from the non-productive conditions of the own nature of the Dharmadhatu, the conditions and the characteristics of these conditions all arise from that nature. That nature itself is the Dharmadhatu. There is no inside, outside, or in between. You should be aware of this and investigate accordingly. Buddhas and sentient beings manifest illusorily from the nature sea of the fundamental wisdom of universal brightness. Although the forms and functioning of sentient beings and Buddhas seem to be different, they are entirely the form and functioning of the fundamental wisdom of universal brightness. Therefore, while they are originally of one essence, they still can give rise to functioning at many levels. This corresponds to the tenet of nature origination. The mutual interfusion of sentient beings and Buddhas discussed elsewhere means that Vairochana Buddha, the perfected fruition wisdom, exists within the impermanent 8 consciousnesses of sentient beings, and that sentient beings also exist within the Buddha wisdom. In this case, when a phenomenon, which is not different from the noumenon, is completely absorbed within the noumenal nature, many phenomena, which are also not different from the noumenon, are made to manifest within that one phenomenon, since all are based on the same noumenon. Hence, the essences of sentient beings and Buddhas might be different, but in accordance with the noumenon, each phenomenon pervades equally everywhere. As in Indra's net, all the jewels might be different, but their individual luster is matted together with that of all the others, i.e., each one reflects in every other jewel. This is equivalent to the interfusion of all phenomena from the standpoint of the conditioned origination of the Dharmadhatu. Suppose we explicate further the principles of these doctrines and weigh them again and again. Although we can demonstrate that nature origination and conditioned origination both return to one unity, the meaning of nature origination is more appropriate for contemplation and attaining the path. Cease your wrangling and reflect on this point in silence. In another place, which describes the meaning of attaining Buddhahood, it is said, first one awakens to the Vairochana Dharmadhatu, and then cultivates Samantabhadra's sea of practices. This means that if the Vairochana Dharmadhatu is understood, one can present in detail the characteristics of the unimpeded interpenetration of all phenomena, as explained in the teaching of conditioned origination. But then it is said you must first give rise to thought and observe it, for if you do not give rise to thought, you will lose the unimpeded perfect qualities of the fruition of Buddhahood. This is completely wrong. How is it possible that the perfect qualities of the fruition of Buddhahood are manifested through the appearance of deluded thoughts? If they manifest because of thoughts, they are impermanent dharmas. Does it not say the following in the sutra? If a person wants to comprehend the state of Buddhahood, he should purify his mind until it is like empty space. Leaving far behind all deluded thoughts and clinging allows the tendencies of the mind to operate without impediment. I advise inferior men who cannot look back on the radiance emitted from the Buddha wisdom in their own minds to keep their thoughts steady and not allow their faith to deteriorate. Then they too will succeed. The purpose of this exposition is different, however. It aims solely to induce ordinary men of great aspiration to look back on the radiance of the one true Dharmadhatu, which is their own mind's fundamental wisdom of universal brightness. They will then be able to awaken to the fact that although the names of the Buddhas in the 10 directions, Vairochana Buddha, the Buddha of unmoving wisdom, and so forth, are different, and the regalia of their physical worlds and their persons are each unique, these are the form and functioning of their mind's wisdom of universal brightness. They are not external things. Since the measure of their own wisdom of universal brightness is as great as space or all of the Dharmadhatu, there is neither a single Buddha who does not arise from this original wisdom, nor a single sentient being who is not born from the fundamental wisdom. Therefore, it should be known that Buddhas and sentient beings arise illusorily from this wisdom, and abide illusorily in this wisdom. There is no other place from which arising occurs, and no other place to which extinction goes. As the exposition says, when you penetrate to the fact that mind and objects, whether personal or non-personal, are universally true, you universally perceive that the minds of sentient beings, your own mind, the mind of the Tathagatas, and even the bodies of each of these are all of the same essence and characteristics. They are all phantom signs. When you see none of the signs of arising, subsisting, decay, and extinction, you are near. If you are deluded and seek somewhere else, you are far astray. This sort of dharma is frequently explained in the Avatamsaka Sutra. A poem of the commentator says, "The Buddha is the Buddha in the minds of sentient beings. In terms of personal capacity, they are not different things. If you want to know the source of all the Buddhas, awaken to the fact that your own ignorance originally is Buddha." If you examine the words of this poem carefully, you will understand it. For those who are contemplating the mind nowadays, the fruition wisdom produced by awakening from their own ignorance is both the noumenal Buddha and the phenomenal Buddha. It is the Buddha within themselves and the Buddha within others. It is the causal Buddha and the fruition Buddha. Consequently, it is said, whether it is the water at the beginning of the river or the water at the end, it is still all the one nature of water. Whether it is the causal Buddha or the fruition Buddha, it is of one nature, Buddhahood. As it was said, the Buddha is the Buddha in the minds of sentient beings. In terms of personal capacity, they are not different things. We know that the sea of characteristics of the 10 bodies of Vairochana Buddha, the perfected fruition wisdom, is entirely the Buddha of the mind's own wisdom of universal brightness. According to what an individual's faculties can bear, it manifests what appear to be external characteristics. The regalia of his world and his person are, however, originally not external things. Since the measure of the mind's own wisdom of universal brightness is equal to the Dharma Dhatu and the whole of space, that wisdom's forms and functions are by nature free. They may be one or many, great or small, sentient beings or Buddhas, oneself or others, apparent or concealed, contracted or expanded, adverse or favorable, good or bad, tainted or pure. This inscrutable store of great brightness contains all dharmas and is the source of the myriads of transformations. From the stage of an ordinary man, therefore, until he first gives rise to the bodhicitta, practices the bodhisattva path, and finally reaches the stage of fruition, all of Vairochana Buddha's great compassion, wisdom, and vows, as well as each and every thought, each and every action, each and every dharma, each and every moment, and each and every place, are all the operation of his own mind's wisdom of universal brightness. The wisdom of universal brightness is vast and penetrating, empty and bright. Its numinous exquisiteness knows no bounds, and its universal functioning is self-reliant, operating according to rule and constant. Even though one dharma may arise from conditions, there are none which are not qualities arising from the nature of one's own mind. Because generality and particularity, identity and difference, integration and destruction are simultaneous and unrestricted, if one reflects on a dharma with wisdom, all 6 characteristics can be perceived. But if one considers a dharma with the sense consciousnesses, those characteristics cannot be known. If one shines universally over all sentient beings with the Buddha's wisdom of universal brightness, which is within one's own mind, the marks of sentient beings are the marks of the Tathagatas. The speech of sentient beings is the speech of the Tathagatas, and the minds of sentient beings are the minds of the Tathagatas. Even one's livelihood and everyday work, one's talents in construction or artistry, are applications of the form and functioning of the Tathagata's wisdom of universal brightness. There is no difference whatsoever. Sentient beings deceive themselves through their own actions. They themselves perceive that this is an ordinary man. This is a saint. This is oneself. This is someone else. This is the cause. This is the effect. This is tainted. This is pure. This is nature. These are characteristics, and so forth. They themselves give rise to discrimination, and they themselves end up backsliding. It does not happen in this way due to the wisdom of universal brightness. But if one gives rise to a mind of great ardor and is aware that one's ignorance is originally spiritual, originally true, and the perpetual dharma of the effortless great functioning, this is the unmoving wisdom of all the Buddhas. Out of his great compassion, the commentator reiterated this fact when he said, "Since all sentient beings are originally born from the fundamental wisdom of all the Buddhas, that fundamental wisdom of universal brightness becomes the starting point in the production of the bodhicitta." He also said, "If you want to know the source of all the Buddhas, you must awaken to the fact that your own ignorance originally is Buddha. How is it that wise men who have had the chance to hear these earnest words of the saints of old neither give rise to faith nor contemplate their own minds, but rather end up chattering the whole day long and frittering away their lives? Question. We have listened to your explanations, which are profound and difficult to comprehend. Nevertheless, you only express the idea that everything has the same essence and do not recognize their individual differences. This is an imperfect theory, then, since there are obvious distinctions in the relative pollution and purity of the conditionally arisen primary and secondary karmic aspects of the 10 realms. Consequently, the heritage of both oneself and others is, in each case, different. In such a situation, how can one ever turn Vairochana Buddha, the perfected fruition wisdom, into one's own Buddha? This approach is not as good as the explanations of the orthodox Hwaom commentators, who say that the Noumenal upon which the fruition wisdom of Vairochana Buddha is based, and the Noumenal upon which the impermanent 8 consciousnesses of sentient beings are based, are of the same essence. And since the Noumenal upon which they are based is the same, the undeveloped minds of sentient beings who have not practiced can produce both cause and fruition. Chinul. As this has already been discussed, set your mind to rest and stop arguing. Empty your heart and reflect inwardly. The essential thing is to produce the sublime fruition. Why must you ask further questions? But since you have raised the question, I will explain further. If we were to discuss the meaning of interpenetration in the teachings of the unimpeded conditioned origination, it would certainly be as you have noted in your argument. But the purpose of this commentator is to point out directly, to ordinary men of great aspiration who have awakened suddenly to the Buddha wisdom, the principle of the one true Dharmadhatu, the fruitioncy of the Buddha's wisdom of universal brightness. Even though that Dharmadhatu is beyond all words, he did what he could to explain it. If you grasp at that Dharmadhatu according to his explanation, then in identity there is no difference, and in difference there is no identity. When you speak of self, you mean it is not someone else. When you speak of others, you mean it is not yourself. If you understand it properly, however, identity is difference, and oneself is others. For those who have properly understood this idea, we can discuss the identity which contains the Buddhas of all others. But let us consider contemporary practitioners who have had a sudden awakening. They have completely perceived that the sphere of the Dharmadhatu of their own minds originally contains oneself and others, ordinary men and saints, and cause and effect. Thus I have only discussed their own minds' Buddha fruition of the wisdom of universal brightness. But ultimately this sphere too is neither identical nor different, neither self nor others, for it is a state of wisdom beyond all words. If you grasp at the view that the endowments of present-day ordinary men and saints are each different, and advocate that neither one's own Buddha nor the Buddha of others, neither identity nor difference, can be haphazardly correlated, this is a futile misconception. Since you cannot forget your opinionated attachments, when will you be able to enter the realm of that original wisdom which completely contains both sentient beings and Buddhas, and is free within both identity and difference? If you insist on discussing this question from a conditional standpoint, and wish to argue over differences the whole day long, you are free to do so. But if, relying on contemplation, you wish to realize Bodhi swiftly, and thereby liberate yourself from the dust and troubles of this world, ferry across hosts of deluded beings, and perpetuate the living lineage of the Buddhas, you must fuse together in your own mind the distinctions between ordinary men and saints, cause and effects, and secondary and primary karmic results. Then your mind will contain all of the 6 characteristics, a state not knowable via the sense consciousnesses. Later I will explain this further. This is the primary idea of all the sutras and shastras, and the comprehensive teaching of the thousands of saints. Does it not say the following in the Appearance of the Tathagatas chapter? Once Bodhisattva Mahasattvas hear this Dharma, they can learn, through great investigation, that all the Buddhas of the 3 time periods have the same essential nature. By means of the wholesome faculty of the wisdom of transference, they can enter everywhere into this Dharma. There is no entrance, and yet they do enter. They have no mental turmoil regarding even one Dharma. By means of one Dharma, they constantly contemplate all dharmas. Disciples of the Buddha, if Bodhisattva Mahasattvas perfect such qualities, with only a little effort they will obtain the natural wisdom that needs no instructor. Furthermore, a sutra says, the myriads of images in the universe are marked by one Dharma. National Master Xian Chou, Fa-tsang, said, one Dharma means the one mind. This mind embraces all mundane and supramundane dharmas. It is the essence of the great general characteristic of the one Dharmadhatu. It is only because of deluded thoughts that it is differentiated. If you leave behind deluded thoughts, only the one true suchness remains. This is called the ocean seal samadhi. ocean seal is the original enlightenment of true suchness. When delusion is eliminated and the mind is purified, the myriads of images appear together equally. It is like the ocean where waves have been built up by the wind. If the wind is calmed and the ocean becomes placid, there are no images which do not reflect. Consequently, it is called the ocean seal samadhi. If this passage is discussed solely from the standpoint that in the mind of a single sentient being, the three greatnesses are equal, and the original and actualized enlightenments are non-dual, it is like the explanation in the awakening of faith. The word dharma means the mind of the sentient being. This mind embraces all mundane and supramundane dharmas. Based on this mind, Mahāyāna doctrine is revealed. If the question is discussed from the standpoint that sentient beings and Buddhas are interfused within the mind of a single sentient being, and cause and effect are simultaneous, this passage is similar to the explanation given by the Avatamsaka commentator. The Buddha is the Buddha in the minds of sentient beings. In terms of personal capacity, they are not different things. If you want to know the source of all the Buddhas, awaken to the fact that your own ignorance originally is Buddha. As a Gatha in the appearance of the Tathagatas chapter states, the wisdom of the Buddhas is just so. It pervades the minds of sentient beings, but as it is shackled by deluded thoughts, it is neither enlightened nor aware. The great loving kindness and compassion of all the Buddhas prompt sentient beings to eliminate their deluded thoughts. When in this manner the Buddhas appear, they benefit all bodhisattvas. This is the eternal meaning of the mutual interfusion of sentient beings and Buddhas in the mind of each and every sentient being. The exposition states, although we propose a progressive course of advancement through the 10 levels of faith and the 5 stages of the bodhisattva path, and ultimately perfect thereby the practices of samantabhadra, which are the final result produced by the fulfillment of such causes, still time does not move, and the wisdom of universal brightness does not change. One who brings this contemplation to perfection realizes that the mind of faith means the simultaneous, comprehensive understanding which exists throughout the 10 levels of faith and onward until his achievement of the fruition of Buddhahood and the fulfillment of the practices of samantabhadra. This is the initial arising of the mind of faith in the ordinary man of great aspiration nowadays, in which cause the arising of faith and result, full enlightenment, are simultaneous. If we examine the significance of these statements, we see that the principles of the one mind and its 3 greatnesses, which are discussed in the Avatamsaka Sutra and the Awakening of Faith, both in detail and in brief, analytically and synthetically, receive a different explanation in accordance with people's faculties. Nevertheless, these passages explain that they are contained within the minds of contemporary men. If a person argues the whole day long about the words of the teaching, however, it merely increases his conceit and inclination to argue, until finally he passes his whole life to no avail whatsoever. Is it not tragic if he fails to understand the need to look back on the radiance of the mind and cultivate the brahmacharya diligently? How could the saints of old not have known that Dharma means the minds of all the Buddhas? How could they not have known that the Buddha wisdom exists within the minds of the bodhisattvas? But perhaps this was not the case. Instead, maybe they repeatedly pointed to the minds of sentient beings so that you would open your mouths and argue all day long, or so that you would not cultivate contemplation, but instead return again to submersion in samsara. If you have the faculty of faith, reflect on this 3 times. Question: we have listened carefully to what you have said so far, but how could seeing the nature and attaining Buddhahood in the case of past and present accomplished men in the Sun sect be anything more than a realization of one aspect of the essence of the pure nature, which remains deficient in regard to form and functioning? Chinul: this is not correct. How could you not have heard? The great master Yongcha Chen Chui spent one night as Zhaoqi and awakened to his original mind. Here are some excerpts from the ode he composed. The shining of the mirror-like mind is unimpeded in its brightness. Its bright luster radiates throughout worlds as numerous as grains of sand. All the phenomena in creation reflect within it. In the one ray of perfect light there is neither inside nor outside. One nature completely penetrates all natures. One dharma fully contains all other dharmas. One moon universally appears in all bodies of water. All the moons appearing in those waters are merged in that one moon. The Dharmakaya of all the Buddhas enters into my own nature, and my nature reunites with that of all the Tathagatas. Ying Xiao Wu awakened to his original mind and composed a gatha which says, the 10 directions appear equally on the tip of a hair. In the reduplicated flower treasury worlds, Indra's net shines coolly. The Sön master, Da Hui, held up his whisk and said, "If you want to understand the meaning of the Buddha nature, contemplate the circumstances of the present moment of time. When the time is right, its meaning manifests of itself. You should know that the appearance in the world of all the Buddhas who are as numerous as particles of dust, descending to the royal palace, sitting at the Bodhi Manda, turning the Dharma wheel, subduing Mara's armies, ferrying across sentient beings, and entering into nirvana, are not separate from this one time. If any of you can believe this, then throughout boundless world systems, oneself and others are not separated by as much as the tip of a hair. The 10 time periods of past and present, from beginning to end, are not separate from the present thought moment. In this sort of experience there is an awakening to the original mind which produces, in the mirror of one's mind, a perception of the inexhaustible Dharmadhatu, which is like the multi-layered net of Indra. Such experiences are so common in the biographies and records of the Sön school that they cannot be counted. Deluded people do not know the source of these experiences. They neither peruse the Sön records nor examine the purport of this great exposition of the Avatamsaka Sutra. Consequently, when they hear a Sön adherent explain that mind is the Buddha, they assume that this means nothing more than the Buddhahood of the nature's purity. This is utter foolishness. It is not that the Huaom teachings give an incomplete explanation of the Noumenal. Rather, students of the doctrine have stagnated at the limit of words and dogmas, and are not yet able to forget the doctrine, understand the mind, and quickly realize Bodhi. It was for this reason that Bodhidharma came from the West. He wanted them to know that the moon is not the finger which points at it. Because the Dharma is one's own mind, he did not establish words and letters, but only transmitted the mind with the mind. Consequently, the Sön approach values only the breaking of grasping and the manifestation of the source. It is no use for a profusion of words or the establishment of doctrines. Words and phrases which break grasping are close to one aspect of the noumenal nature, that of leaving behind words and cutting off thoughts. Deluded people do not understand this and always assume that the verbal examples used in Sön are the same as the sudden teachings. This is absolutely incorrect. Even in the case of the Huaom doctrine of the multifaceted mystery of the inexhaustible Dharmadhatu, if a craving for this Dharma is produced and conceptual understanding is not forgotten, that doctrine too should be abandoned. The Chonte teachings say, attachment to the complete teachings too would have to be broken by the inception teachings. The fruition of the nature sea is the realization of the Dharmadhatu. However, it cannot be spoken of before realization and is not ascertainable by ratiocination or intellectual understanding. Therefore, the patriarch Qingliang also said, the complete sound is not struck, but it is ever reverberating. The fruition sea is apart from thought, but it is transmitted by the mind. The Buddha's realization is beyond words. From these statements we know that the Sön transmission, which is beyond thought, is the sudden realization of the Dharmadhatu. It is certainly not the same as the sudden teachings. The sudden teachings do not explain the characteristics of Dharma and advocate that the mere perception of the true nature where one thought does not arise is Buddhahood. How do we know this is the way it is? In Sön, there are 3 mysterious gates. First, the mystery in the essence. Second, the mystery in the word. Third, the mystery in the mystery. The mystery in the essence is the approach to Dharma which demonstrates the unimpeded interpenetration of all phenomena, and involves such statements as, throughout boundless world systems, oneself and others are not separated by as much as the tip of a hair. The 10 time periods of past and present, from beginning to end, are not separate from the present thought moment. It is a preliminary approach for inducing an awakening in those of beginning potential. Since this approach has not yet abandoned understanding based on the verbal teachings, the mystery in the word is employed. These words have no traces, or ordinary, have a cleansing effect, and eliminate grasping so that students can suddenly forget their conceptual understanding and knowledge of the Buddha Dharma. But since this approach also involves cleansing knowledge and vision, and cleansing words and phrases, the mystery in the mystery, the use of pauses, silence, the staff, and the Sön shout, is also employed in training. When this last approach is used, one can suddenly forget the cleansing knowledge and vision and the cleansing words and phrases of the second mysterious gate. As it is said, when we get the meaning and forget the words, the path is near at hand. This is called the sudden realization of the Dharmadhatu. For inferior men of beginning capacity, the Sön school points out that there is a sublime mind, pure in its nature, which flows along with the stream of falsity and pollution. This enables such men to understand easily and enter in faith. After they have entered in faith and forgotten their understanding, they can achieve personal realization. But if they do not forget their understanding, they will sit in the deep pit of liberation, unable to use their bodies freely in displaying the manifold supplementary practices belonging to the approach of conditioned arising. In the scholastic teachings also, the original enlightenment of the nature's purity is considered to be the source of the Dharmadhatu's unimpeded conditioned arising. In National Master Xian Shou's work, The Contemplation which Extinguishes Falsity and Returns to the Source based on the profound meaning of the Avatamsaka Sutra, it is said, first, the one essence is displayed. This means the pure and perfectly bright essence of the self-nature. This then is the essence of the nature's purity within the Tathagata-garbha. Since the beginning, this nature has been complete in itself. Even if it abides in pollution, it is not tainted. Even if it is cultivated, it becomes no purer. Consequently, it is called the purity of the self-nature. The essence of this nature shines everywhere. There is no darkness it does not illumine. Therefore, it is called perfect brightness. When defilements cover it, it is concealed. When wisdom reveals it, it appears. It is not something which comes into being due to the arising cause. It is rather understood through the understanding cause. In the awakening of faith, it is said, one's own nature of true suchness is invested with the attribute of the great light of wisdom, with the attribute of shining over all the Dharmadhatu, and with the attribute of true knowledge. This is explained fully in that Shastra. Consequently, I referred to the pure and perfectly bright essence of the self-nature. Second, grounded on this pure essence, two functions are produced. First is the constantly abiding function of the ocean seal of all phenomena. Ocean seal means the original enlightenment of true suchness. When falseness is extinguished and the mind is purified, myriads of images will appear together. It will be like clear seawater. There are no images which do not reflect. The awakening of faith calls it the sea of the Dharma nature's suchness, which is a store of immeasurable qualities. This is why it is named the ocean seal samadhi. Second is the Dharmadhatu's perfectly bright and self-reliant function. This is the flower garland, avatamsaka samadhi. This means that once one has fully cultivated the manifold supplementary practices, meritorious qualities are perfected in accordance with the Noumenal. The essence universally pervades the Dharmadhatu, and bodhi is realized. For this reason it is called the Dharmadhatu's perfectly bright and self-reliant functioning. Third, the three pervasions are pointed out. This means that, based on the two previous functions, the essence universally pervades the Dharmadhatu from within each of these two functions. For this reason it is called pervasion. The first of these is the pervasion in which one dust mote universally pervades the Dharmadhatu. The second is the pervasion in which one dust mote produces the quality of inexhaustibility. The third is the pervasion in which one dust mote merges both voidness and existence into one. This is an explanation of the unimpeded interpenetration of all phenomena. According to the explanation given here by Xian Shou, the quality of unimpeded interfusion which universally pervades the Dharmadhatu, as expressed by these two functions, three pervasions, and so forth, arises from the pure, perfectly bright essence of the self-nature within the minds of sentient beings. If, as the Huaom sect explains, this one true, unobstructed Dharmadhatu is equal to the original enlightenment of the nature's purity within the minds of sentient beings, and yet their essences are all assumed to be different, then the patriarch Xian Shou would be a deceitful liar, luring the blind and the deaf to have made such an explanation. Consequently, we know the teachings are established according to the differences in individual capacities. In their broad details, the teachings might differ slightly, but their source is one. The Dharma master, Fa-tsang, said, in the Gata from his chart of the Avatamsaka one-vehicle Dharmadhatu, the Dharma nature is perfectly interfused and free from any sign of duality. Hence all dharmas are unmoving and originally calm. That nature leaves behind both name and appearance and severs everything. It is known through realization wisdom, for it is beyond all relative states. The true nature is extremely deep and exceedingly sublime. By not guarding its own nature, adaptability is attained. Within the one there is everything, and within the many is the one. The one is precisely everything, and the many are precisely the one. Within one minute dust mote is contained the worlds of the 10 directions. With all other dust motes it is just the same. Immeasurable numbers of kalpas are precisely one instant of thought. One instant of thought is an immeasurable number of kalpas. In the first line of this gatha, the perfect interfusion of the Dharma nature, which is without any sign of duality, refers to the pure and perfectly bright essence of the self-nature as explained by Xian Shou. It is also the perfectly bright purity of the original true nature of sentient beings, which abides in pollution but is not stained, which is cultivated but becomes no purer. When defilements cover it, it is concealed. When wisdom reveals it, it appears. It is not something which comes into being due to the arising cause. It is rather only understood through the understanding cause. If someone looks back on the radiance of his own mind's pure, enlightened nature, and thereby extinguishes falsity and cleanses his mind, the myriads of images then appear together. It is just like seawater that has settled. There are no images which are not reflected. Hence it is called the ever-abiding function of the ocean seal of all phenomena in the universe. Accordingly, we can know that the perfectly bright and self-reliant functions of the Dharma Dhatu which remain, including the unimpeded interpenetration of all phenomena as described in the three pervasions, are never separate from the pure enlightened nature. As explained by Fa-tsang, the Dharma nature is perfectly interfused, has no name or sign, and is free of all relativity. It can only be known through realization wisdom and is beyond all relative states. This also describes the personal realization of the self-nature which is originally quiet and settled, and is beyond all names and signs. It is the source of the Dharma Dhatu, of the unimpeded interpenetration of all phenomena. How can you assume that because these realizations transcend words, they are the same as the sudden teachings? As a provisional teaching for those of inferior faculties, masters in the Sun school also employ the approach which adapts to differences in capacity. Although they also discuss the pure enlightened nature contained in the mind associated with defilements, they do so only to enable students to look back on the radiance of the self-nature. They do not consider explanations of principles, whether profound or superficial, to be of any value. If, due to one word of a master, a person looks back on the radiance of the self-nature and suddenly forgets words and understanding, the differences in the conditionally arisen secondary and primary karmic aspects throughout the 10 realms will all appear brilliantly in the mirror of his own mind. There the Dharma Dhatu's unimpeded conditioned arising can be perceived. Those in darkness futilely bring up the complete teachings doctrine of the unimpeded Dharma Dhatu and say that the sun theory means nothing more than the principle expressed in the awakening of faith concerning the purity of the nature, which is involved with defilements, or the attribute of being beyond words and signs, which is one aspect of the noumenal nature. This view results from attachment to the traces of words and teachings. They do not know that although the teachings propounded by the saints of old, which take into account differences in capacity, are distinguished by their detail and their length, none of them fail to point out the return to the one mind. If you can suddenly forget the differences in the theoretical interpretations of the established verbal teachings, and, while sitting quietly in a private room, empty your heart and cleanse your thoughts, trace back the radiance of your own mind and return to its source, then you can consider the pure nature of the sublime mind which appears in that immediate thought moment to be either the original enlightenment which is involved in defilement, the original enlightenment of the nature's purity, the unimpeded Dharma Dhatu, the Buddha of unmoving wisdom, or Vairochana Buddha. Where noumenon and phenomena and self and others are identical, any of these alternatives is justified. Consequently, you should know that, in Xian Shou's understanding, the original enlightenment of the nature's purity as described in the awakening of faith is the source of the 2 functions and the 3 pervasions. In Fa-tsang's interpretation, the sudden teachings transcending of words and signs is also the fruition of the nature sea, a state which is knowable by the Buddha wisdom. Therefore we know that when those of lesser faculties grasp at words, everything becomes different. When those who are accomplished understand properly, everything becomes the same. Nowadays, when ordinary men of great aspiration receive the instructions of good advisers, if they can trace back the light and look back on the mind, the defilements which have abided on the ground of ignorance for vast numbers of kalpas become the wisdom of universal brightness of all the Buddhas. Since the defilements, the ignorance, and the illusory guises of sentient beings have all arisen from the Tathagata's wisdom of universal brightness, if they look back on the mind today, they will find that these are all entirely their own essence, and not external things. They are like waves which arise on still water. The waves are the water. They are like phantom flowers which appear in the sky. The flowers are only the sky. Wan Yo said, "The calm radiance does not shine, but there is nothing it does not shine on. How can the brightness of wisdom be gained by extinguishing the darkness of ignorance? If, in this manner, one awakens to the fundamental wisdom of universal brightness within one's own mind, it is said that the fully enlightened Buddha is present in the initial arousing of the bodhicitta. As the exposition says, if we stamp everything with the sublime wisdom of Bodhi, perverse thought and wrong behavior are naturally unborn. This is called right enlightenment." Question: If ordinary men nowadays awaken to the mind and achieve Buddhahood, is this the ultimate stage or not? If it is the ultimate stage, then how can it be called the initial arousing of the bodhicitta? If it is not, how can it be called right enlightenment? Chinul: In this region of birth and death, if ordinary, shackled men nowadays are able to perfect the Buddha's fundamental wisdom of universal brightness, through the seed of ignorant discrimination they use every day, it is because the fundamental wisdom of all the Buddhas is originally of one essence with the ignorant mind of sentient beings. For this reason, ordinary men nowadays should regard the fruition sea of the fundamental wisdom as the source of the initial awakening which arouses the bodhicitta. If they do not suddenly awaken to the fact that they are distinct from the defiled nature of their minds, and that they are originally in full possession of the non-outflow wisdom nature, how can this be called the Buddha vehicle's complete and sudden approach in which initial faith is perfected by ultimate fruition? The exposition says, the fundamental wisdom should be considered the catalyst for the initial production of the bodhicitta. Since the fundamental wisdom is complete, all times universally interpenetrate one another. This fundamental wisdom is the primary essence of all embracing wisdom. It is the beginning and end in the accomplishment of any practice. It is the starting point for the production of all dharmas. Since wisdom is the vanguard for all the manifold supplementary practices, if one knows this wisdom sea well, then the practice sea, the bodhicitta sea, and the loving-kindness and compassion sea have all arisen from this fruition sea of the fundamental wisdom. The three vehicle teachings place this fruition after the 5 stages. The one vehicle teaching places it at the first level of the 10 faiths. Since the superiority and inferiority of the spiritual families of sentient beings are not the same, the teachings have been established in accordance with the differences in their faculties. This is confirmation. From this passage we learn that one who relies on the complete and sudden approach of the one vehicle attains the fruition sea of the fundamental wisdom at the first level of the 10 faiths. It is clear that it is not achieved upon completion of the 10 levels of faith after 10,000 kalpas of constant cultivation. The exposition explains only that the work is finished after one life. There is no mention whatsoever of 10,000 kalpas. When an ordinary novice encounters the right conditions, he then recognizes his own mind's fundamental wisdom of universal brightness. He does not awaken to it after the efficacy of gradual cultivation has matured. Nevertheless, although the noumenal wisdom manifests, because thought after thought, the residual habit energies of many lives continue to invade, he remains involved in discriminative action and fabrication. Neither form nor mind is yet extinguished. This is called the obstruction of understanding for the ordinary man who is still cultivating the 10 faiths. On the other hand, through awakening to the fact that his own ignorance is originally spiritual and true, and that it is the permanent dharma of the effortless great function, the student is able to cultivate the expedience of shamatha vipassana throughout the 10 faiths until his work is naturally brought to completion, and samadhi and prajna become perfectly bright. This is then called the arousing of the bodhicitta on the initial abiding stage. The statement in the Brahmacharya chapter that the initial arousing of the bodhicitta is the attainment of anuttara samyak sambodhi corresponds to this abiding. After he enters into the 10 abidings, then through his wisdom of universal brightness he stays permanently in the world, universally responds to other beings according to their faculties, and teaches sentient beings. He is free of corrupt attachments. His compassion and wisdom gradually brighten. His meritorious practices gradually increase, and ultimately he perfects the practices of Samantabhadra. When the causes are fulfilled and the fruition is accomplished, he obtains as karmic reward innumerable major and minor marks, and immeasurable varieties of regalia. Like light or shadow, he completely pervades the 10 directions. He does not exist, but he is not non-existent. He is not eternal, but he is also not annihilated. All of this is due to the free functioning of his great vows and great wisdom. The self-reliance of this great functioning is not separate from the constant operation which takes place within the fundamental wisdom of universal brightness realized upon the initial awakening. Since the essence of wisdom is complete, time does not move, and wisdom does not change. Since the habit energies are refined during this time, and compassion and wisdom are gradually perfected, he progresses through the various levels of the Bodhisattva path. Yet the gate of timeless wisdom was entered upon his initial activation of the bodhicitta. Thus, even though he arrives at the ultimate stage, from the start he has really not moved at all. It is like an ornate royal seal. Once it is stamped, all sections of the pattern are printed simultaneously. If a person tries to comprehend the similarities and differences in the faculties of sentient beings through the 6 characteristics, he will be able to perceive this. If one in darkness tries to discuss this question from the standpoint that the fundamental wisdom contains the 5 stages, however, this does not allow for the practice of gradual cultivation, and shows that there is only knowledge of the general characteristic. By the same token, if this is discussed from the standpoint of the progressive development of practice and understanding through the various stages and sequences, then this would not allow time to be unmoved, or wisdom to be unchanged, and would not sanction the idea that it is like an ornate royal seal. Once it is stamped, all sections of the pattern are printed simultaneously. But this shows only that he believes in the characteristic of difference. These biases exist because these people have not yet abandoned effective views, and their noumenal wisdom is not yet complete. The exposition says, as far as entering into this teaching of the first Bhumi's 6 characteristics is concerned, and in fact until its eventual mastery, it is because the accomplished ordinary man can activate great practices and vows that he will be able to direct himself toward that teaching and enter into it. Hence this is not something developed through practice and understanding prior to the Bhumis. The idea was clarified and the doctrine established in order to illuminate fully the obstacles, stages, and critical points of practice. For one who has aroused the bodhicitta, however, everything is cultivated suddenly at one time. He abides within one time and one practice. It is not that he must proceed sequentially through a series of stages. It is by means of the dharmas of generality and particularity, identity and difference, and integration and destruction that perfect interfusion can be perceived. Within these 3 pairs of 6 terms, each term contains all 6. An analogy about the human body will make it possible to understand any other object. The body contains these 6 characteristics: the head, trunk, hands, feet, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and all other parts are each different. This is the characteristic of particularity. That collectively they are one body and one collection of the 4 elements is their general characteristic. That they are each void and without essence is their characteristic of identity. That the body does not lack this undifferentiated nature, yet does have differences in its head and other functions is the characteristic of difference. That the head, trunk, and so forth together compose this one body is their characteristic of integration. That these parts exist merely through the operation of non-productive causes and are each without self-nature, essence, or characteristics, and are not born and do not die, is their characteristic of destruction. Furthermore, that people are all sentient beings is their general characteristic. The differentiation into fools and wise men is their characteristic of particularity. That they all exist while possessing the same Buddha wisdom is their characteristic of identity. That their actions are different according to their attachments is their characteristic of difference. The retribution they have received and the birth they have obtained due to their actions is their characteristic of integration. That the mind does not abide anywhere and that the essence of action has no nature is called the characteristic of destruction. Furthermore, the Sambhogakaya Buddhas of the 10 directions are said to be the general characteristic. The differences in the precious ornaments with which their bodies and lands are arrayed are called the characteristic of particularity. That they are the same Dharmakaya in which noumenal wisdom is non-dual is called their characteristic of identity. Their wisdom changing in adaptation to impulses is called their characteristic of difference. That they bring sentient beings to perfection is called the characteristic of integration. The fact that the subject, the Buddha, and the object, sentient beings, are both void, unascertainable, and unrealizable is called the characteristic of destruction. Furthermore, that one wisdom contains all the 5 stages is called the general characteristic. That there is progressive advancement in practice and understanding is called the characteristic of particularity. The fact that all have the same fundamental wisdom of Buddhahood is called the characteristic of identity. the cultivation of the discriminative wisdom, is called the characteristic of difference. The accomplishment of great Bodhi and the perfection of the practices of Samantabhadra is called the characteristic of integration. That the essence of wisdom abides nowhere, and that its function remains non-productive is called the characteristic of destruction. Furthermore, the distinctions created throughout the long kalpas of the 3 time periods are called the characteristic of particularity. That wisdom can contemplate all this in one kshana is called the general characteristic. The good qualities or shortcomings produced by actions are called the characteristic of difference. That there is no time at which either good qualities or shortcomings exist after passions have disappeared and views have been extinguished is called the characteristic of identity. That wisdom does not abide anywhere is called the characteristic of destruction. Giving dharma according to the faculties of the recipient is called the characteristic of integration. The fruition of Buddhahood, the wisdom of universal brightness, which is understood through the understanding awakening, leaves behind words at the point where the Dharma Dhatu is realized. Although this fruition cannot be discussed before awakening, if we consider it now from the standpoint of the cultivation done after awakening, that is, in the approach of conditioned arising, then its 2 aspects of perfect interfusion and progressive practice are both accomplished. Its 2 aspects of ultimate and non-ultimate stages are both perfected. Its 2 aspects of noumenal Buddha and phenomenal Buddha are both perfected. And its 2 aspects of one's own fruition of Buddhahood and the fruition of others are both perfected. This even applies to the attainment of Buddhahood on the 10 abiding stages. The exposition says, according to this Buddhavatamsaka Maha Vaipulya Sutra, in the stage of the fruition of Buddhahood, the wisdom of universal brightness, if a person keeps the past and sanctions the present, if he discriminates both the remote past from the near future as well as the movement from past to future in the 3 time periods, if he sees that there are places with Buddhas and places without Buddhas, if he confirms the right Dharma, semblance Dharma, and degenerate Dharma ages, and even in regard to all the Buddhas of the 10 directions and 3 time periods, if he discriminates between old Buddhas and new Buddhas, or between pure lands and soiled lands, and so forth, then we know that his faith is not yet perfected. Furthermore, it states, when in the cause of faith one meshes without the slightest degree of error, with all the qualities of the fruition of Buddhahood, this is called the mind of faith. But if one believes that the Buddha exists outside the mind, this is not called faith. It is called a person of great perverse views. It also says, at the time of the initial production of the bodhicitta, one takes up the fundamental wisdom's great mirror of perfect brightness and reflects all dharmas everywhere. Therefore, we should know that nowadays, when ordinary men who are at the first level of the 10 faiths look back on the radiance of their own self-nature, they are endowed with all the unimaginable qualities gained upon fruition, as we have been discussing. This is because, at the time of the initial production of the bodhicitta, the defilements which exist upon the foundation of ignorance are transformed into the unmoving wisdom of all the Buddhas. When a person begins to practice according to the impulse of his original vow, then even though the deluded habits are not yet exhausted, these all become dharmas which are adaptations to conditions produced through the operation of the fundamental wisdom. As it is said, wisdom is activated initially by the original vow. Until his work is finished and the vow is fulfilled, he benefits sentient beings through that wisdom of universal brightness. Consequently, we know that the fundamental wisdom's responsive dharmas are all eternal impulses which have adapted to conditions. All the forms and functions of the Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya are the effortless wisdom's impulse of great compassion. He adapts to the views of sentient beings and brings forth this impulse from his vow. Then the power of his wholesome faculty of loving kindness, which arises due to great or small conditions, becomes endowed with myriads of different appearances. Like light or shadow, it is free to be either concealed or apparent. It is like an echo in an empty valley, a sound produced according to other objects. It is neither permanent nor impermanent. Hence, states knowable through the mind consciousness are entirely the great functioning of the fundamental wisdom. When we say that Samantabhadra is the discriminative wisdom, we are referring to the functioning of the essence of the fundamental wisdom of universal brightness. Since it has no before or after, it is said, the measure of the wisdom of universal brightness is equal to the Dharma Dhatu, or to all of space. It is neither center nor edges. Its essence is the same as the mind of all sentient beings, and it is constantly adapting to all sentient beings. At what body should you look? To what dharma should you listen? In the worlds of the 10 directions, that wisdom constantly appears to beings who have affinities for it, and it never neglects the proper time. Although this sort of practice does issue forth from the vow made at the time of one's initial activation of the bodhicitta, and continues until the work is finished, and the vow fulfilled, it does not exist apart from the minds of sentient beings. Therefore, it is said, the Buddhas realize the essence of sentient beings and utilize the function of sentient beings. Furthermore, the Buddha is the Buddha in the mind of sentient beings. In terms of personal capacity, they are not different things. The ignorant, deluded thoughts of sentient beings are not different from the self-nature. That nature is the original source of the 3 bodies and 4 wisdoms of all the Buddhas. Consequently, it is said, if you want to know the source of all the Buddhas, awaken to the fact that your own ignorance originally is Buddha. Since the Buddha of original wisdom is itself endowed with the qualities of the 3 greatnesses, of nature and characteristics, and of noumenon and phenomenon, it is individual karma that causes a difference in its concealment or appearance. When sentient beings do wrong, their karmic retribution will be tainted because wrong is a negative function. Although there are differences in the primary and secondary karmic results brought on by this negative functioning, they can also be considered to be the unwholesome functioning originally present in the fundamental wisdom. Thus the form and functioning of wisdom are not diminished. When all the Buddhas cultivate goodness, good is a positive function, and thus they gain their regalia as reward. Consequently, their form and functioning are clear and pure. But even though this is a reward obtained through practice, it can also be considered to be the wholesome functioning which is originally present in the fundamental wisdom. Hence there is no increase either. Nevertheless, according to the respective good or evil in individual karma, there are differences between pure or tainted, painful or pleasant. But with reference to these conditionally arisen tainted or pure objects, the essence, characteristics, and function of wisdom are originally without increase or decrease. They are perpetually manifest and unimpeded in regard to either noumenon or phenomenon. Sentient beings and Buddhas are mutually interfused. Hence today, through awakening, we understand that the qualities of the Buddha fruition of unmoving wisdom, like the 3 bodies and the 4 wisdoms, are brought to a sudden completion. It is as the 6th Patriarch explained, the 3 bodies are primordially my essence. The 4 wisdoms are originally the brightness of my mind. This fact in no way obstructs the rewards obtained through subsequent cultivation. This fundamental wisdom of universal brightness, the fruition of Buddhahood, is the essence of both sentient beings and Buddhas. In it, noumenon and phenomenon, nature and characteristics, good and evil, and tainted and pure, are all complete and have all faded away. It is parallel to the one great Dharmakaya Buddha proclaimed by Wondon, as the essence of this wisdom originally contains the 3 greatnesses. It is not merely the noumenal Buddha of the pure nature's original enlightenment. As the essence of wisdom is originally without remoteness or nearness, or extension, or contraction in the 10 time periods, it does not contain the future fruition. As the fundamental wisdom is the Buddha in one's own mind, one individual does not partake of the fruition of Buddhahood immanent in all other beings. Consequently, we know that the assessments of Xian Shou and Qing Liang in regard to the meaning of the Buddha wisdom when it exists in the minds of sentient beings in the Nature Arising chapter differs somewhat from the purport of the elder Li Tung Xuan's exposition. Nevertheless, if the problem is discussed from the standpoint of the meaning of interdependence in the approach involving conditioned arising, then, as we have awakened and thereby understand that sentient beings and Buddhas are perfectly interfused in the wisdom of universal brightness, it is possible to say that individuals do partake in the fruition of Buddhahood immanent in others. As the 10 time periods are completely interfused, it is also possible to say that they are endowed with the future fruition. As the pure nature which adapts to defilement is also a valid concept, it is possible to say, too, that all sentient beings are endowed with it. However, the wisdom of universal brightness, Buddha, which is awakened too suddenly, cannot be discussed from the standpoint of the perfect interfusion or progression associated with conditioned arising. Since it must be known through realization of the Dharma Dhatu, how can its function be spoken of beforehand? Awakening in this context is not the realization awakening achieved through prior cultivation. It is rather the understanding awakening. Nevertheless, as this understanding awakening is an awakening which is produced suddenly, it is identical to the inexpressible fruition's nature C. Since the fruition of Buddhahood in the one vehicle is said to be understood on the first level of the 10 faiths, it cannot be claimed that it incorporates the future fruition. From the standpoint of subsequent cultivation in the approach involving conditioned arising, the approach in which the qualities of fruition are produced when the work is finished and one's vows are fulfilled, or from the standpoint of the essence of the fundamental wisdom, the approach in which all affairs of the 3 time periods are complete, it can be said that each of them is endowed with the future fruition. It is also like all of Maitreya's causes and effects of the 3 time periods which manifested in Maitreya's tower. As the exposition says, in wisdom there is neither past nor present in the 3 time periods, nor remote nor near in internal and external spheres. As the true essence is complete, however, all the affairs of the 10 time periods interpenetrate one another. Although both aspects are valid, the sudden awakening we are discussing now corresponds to the first of them. From the standpoint of gradual cultivation, in the approach of conditioned arising, after the initial understanding awakening on the first level of the 10 faiths, the student diligently cultivates shamatha and vipassana until all the outflows of body and mind are completely extinguished. He then reaches the initial abiding stage where the power of samadhi is perfected and all the obstacles of understanding are destroyed. Entering the 5 stages through the realization awakening, he then passes through the cultivation of the 10 abidings, the 10 practices, the 10 transferences, and the 10 bhumis until he reaches the stage of equal enlightenment. This cultivation is then displayed in his own actions, his own causes and effects of the 3 time periods which are manifest in his true essence, as well as the realm of the Sambhogakaya Buddha and so forth, all appear as if right before his eyes. Therefore the exposition says, this instruction was given by the Sambhogakaya of Vairochana Buddha and was expounded by Manjushri as he traveled from Jetavana to Bodhgaya. As the Sambhogakaya Tathagata is the body adorned with inexhaustible regalia and meritorious qualities, it is not visible to ordinary men, humans, devas, or adherents of the 3 vehicles. Sentient beings of great aspiration can hear the instruction, but they cannot see the body. It can only be seen through the Tathagata's sustaining power. It cannot be seen through the power of one's own actions. Sentient beings of great aspiration have heard and obtained all of this teaching at Manjushri's abode to the east of Bodhgaya. If they then accept the teaching, practice it, and complete that endeavor in one life, all the Buddhas of the 10 directions will appear as if right before their eyes. The Buddha realm, which was seen by Sudana when he reached the Friendly One's tower, is exactly this sort of experience.